New Year's Eve was always a magical night for our family. Our home, tucked away in a quiet suburban neighborhood, was alive with warm lights and soft music. I, Daniel, a geography teacher, was in the kitchen preparing snacks while our 4-year-old daughter Lily sat cross-legged on the living room rug, meticulously arranging her toy animals into a perfect circle. My wife, Clara, a biology teacher, was adding the finishing touches to her hair, the faint scent of her floral perfume wafting through the air. Clara had been distant lately. It wasn't something I could easily put my finger on, just a feeling, like an invisible wall had grown between us. Maybe it was the stress of work or the whirlwind of parenting. We both had demanding schedules, and the once effortless companionship we shared seemed harder to find. Tonight, though, I was determined to make things feel right again. Ready for midnight? I called out, trying to inject some enthusiasm into my voice. Clara appeared in the doorway, wearing a sleek black dress I hadn't seen before. She looked stunning, but something about the way she avoided my eyes struck a discordant note. "I'll need to step out for a bit before the countdown," she said casually, adjusting an earring. "Just dropping off the gifts for the Andersons. I promised them last week." It seemed innocent enough. The Andersons were our neighbors 2 streets over, and Clara was always thoughtful about these things. But as the evening wore on, a knot of unease formed in my stomach. She left just after 10 p.m., and by 11, Lily was curled up asleep on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. Midnight approached, but Clara hadn't returned. I texted her, "Are you on your way back? Lily's out cold, and I've set up the fireworks." The response didn't come until 11:50. "Sorry, running late. Be there soon." The words felt cold, rushed. Not like Clara at all. When the clock struck midnight, I stood in the backyard, holding Lily in my arms as fireworks lit up the night sky. The joy I should have felt was muted by Clara's absence. My mind replayed the small moments from the past months, the late-night messages she dismissed as work emails, the gym sessions she suddenly started attending without inviting me, and the nights she seemed distracted, her laughter feeling rehearsed. Something was wrong. And as the fireworks faded into silence, I resolved to find out what. Clara came home just after 12:30 a.m., the sound of the front door clicking shut breaking the uneasy silence in the house. I was sitting on the living room couch, Lily now tucked away in bed. The half-empty champagne glasses on the coffee table seemed like an ironic reminder of the celebration I had tried so hard to hold on to. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down on the console table. Her cheeks were flushed, and her hair was slightly disheveled. "Sorry I'm late. The Andersons kept me talking forever." I forced a smile. "You missed the fireworks." Lily stayed up as long as she could. Her expression faltered, guilt flickering across her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. I know. I feel terrible." "How was it?" "Beautiful," I said simply, studying her. "You must have had a good time." Clara hesitated, then shrugged. "It was fine. You know how they are, talking about their renovations, their vacations." I didn't want to be rude. "Did they at least like the gifts?" I asked, watching her closely. Her hand froze briefly as she reached for the glass of water on the counter. It was barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Oh, yes. They loved them," she replied, her tone breezy. I nodded, not pressing further, but the gears in my mind were turning. The Andersons had left for a family ski trip the day after Christmas. I remembered seeing their packed car pull out of their driveway. It was odd Clara didn't know, or perhaps she did, and she was banking on me forgetting. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, breaking me out of my thoughts. "You seem off." I shook my head, forcing a light laugh. "Just tired. It's been a long night." She walked over and kissed me on the cheek, lingering for just a moment before retreating upstairs. I stayed behind, staring at the champagne glasses and feeling the weight of something unspoken hanging in the air. It wasn't just the Andersons' supposed absence that gnawed at me. It was the way Clara avoided my gaze, the way her responses felt rehearsed. And the faint scent clinging to her clothes, something sharp and musky that wasn't her usual perfume. When I finally went upstairs, I found her already asleep, curled up on her side with her back to me. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching her steady breathing and wondering if the cracks I was starting to see were real, or if I was imagining them, trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't exist. But deep down, I knew better. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Clara bustling in the kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon drifted upstairs, but instead of feeling comforted, I felt like I was walking into a staged scene. Clara's cheerful hums floated through the house as if nothing was amiss. Morning, she greeted me brightly when I walked into the kitchen. She slid a plate of scrambled eggs and toast toward me. Thought I'd make breakfast since I was out so late last night. Her eyes searched mine, almost as if daring me to bring up the Andersons, or the unspoken tension hanging between us. I didn't bite. Thanks. Smells great, I said, sitting down and taking a sip of coffee. Lily toddled into the room moments later, her wild bedhead drawing a genuine smile from both of us. Mommy, you missed the fireworks, she said with a small pout, climbing onto Clara's lap. I know, sweetheart, and I'm so sorry, Clara cooed, planting a kiss on her forehead. We'll do sparklers together later, okay? As Clara turned her attention to Lily, I couldn't help but notice how perfectly composed she seemed. She had always been good at compartmentalizing, but this felt different, like she was overcompensating. After breakfast, I decided to test something. While Clara was occupied helping Lily get dressed, I casually walked out to the Andersons' house. Snow crunched under my boots as I approached their driveway, still untouched by tire tracks. Their house was dark, the curtains drawn tightly. A quick peek at the mailbox confirmed my suspicion, it was overflowing with unopened mail. They weren't home. They hadn't been for days. My chest tightened as I walked back to my house, replaying Clara's words from the night before. If she hadn't been with the Andersons, where had she been? The rest of the day passed in a blur of family errands and small talk. Clara was warm, attentive, and present, which only deepened my unease. If she was hiding something, she was doing an excellent job of masking it. But her perfect demeanor only made me more determined to find the truth. Later that evening, when Clara was tucking Lily into bed, I took her phone from the kitchen counter. My heart raced as I opened it. Her passcode was the same, something we had always shared openly. I scrolled through her messages, but everything looked normal. Conversations with coworkers, reminders about parent-teacher meetings, a few group chats with friends. Nothing suspicious. Then I checked her call history. That's where I found it, an unsaved number that she had called 3 times yesterday. My fingers hovered over the number, debating whether to dial it, but I decided against it for now. Instead, I wrote it down, my mind spinning with possibilities. When Clara came downstairs, I had already slipped the phone back onto the counter and was pretending to read. She smiled as she sat next to me, her hand resting casually on my knee. You've been quiet today, she said softly. Everything okay? I looked up at her, searching her face for any cracks in the facade. Just tired, I said, my voice steady. Long night with Lily. Her gaze lingered on me for a moment before she leaned in and kissed my cheek. Get some rest, she murmured, heading toward the stairs. I watched her disappear up the staircase, the warmth of her touch lingering but failing to comfort me. I didn't sleep much that night, the unsaved number burned into my memory. Whoever it belonged to, they were my next step toward uncovering the truth. The next morning, Clara left early for her usual Saturday yoga class, something she had started attending a few months ago. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I retrieved the number I had written down and dialed it from my own phone, my pulse racing with anticipation. The line rang twice before a man's voice answered, calm and measured. "Hello." I froze. My mind raced as I tried to come up with something plausible. "Hi, this is Daniel. I think I might have missed a call from this number yesterday." There was a pause. "I don't think so. Who is this again?" "Sorry, wrong number," I said quickly, hanging up before he could say anything more. My hands were clammy, and my chest felt tight. I didn't recognize the voice, but something about his tone made my stomach churn. Who was he? And why had Clara called him 3 times the night she left me waiting on New Year's Eve? Later that day, while Clara and Lily were at the park, I took another step. I logged into our shared phone plan online to check her call records. My heart sank when I saw that the unsaved number wasn't just a one-off. Over the past month, Clara had called it several times, often late in the evening when I was grading papers or already asleep. There were also texts, dozens of them, though I couldn't see the content. I didn't need to. The frequency alone spoke volumes. The walls felt like they were closing in. I stared at the records, my hands shaking as I tried to make sense of it all. Could it be a work contact? A friend I didn't know about? Or was it something far worse? That evening, I couldn't hold back anymore. As we sat together on the couch, a family movie playing softly in the background while Lily dozed off between us, I turned to Clara. "Who's the number you've been calling a lot lately?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes widening briefly before she masked her surprise. "What number?" I recited it from memory, watching her closely. She blinked, then laughed lightly. "Oh, that's Jenna's brother. You remember Jenna, right? From my book club. He's helping me set up a surprise for her birthday. I didn't want to tell you because I know you'd feel bad about keeping secrets from her husband." It was a good answer, too good. She smiled at me, her expression warm and reassuring, but something about it felt rehearsed. My instincts screamed that she was lying. "Oh," I said, leaning back into the couch. "Makes sense." Her shoulders visibly relaxed as she turned back to the TV, her hand resting lightly on Lily's arm. But my mind was already spinning. If she was telling the truth, there wouldn't have been hesitation in her voice. There wouldn't have been that brief flicker of panic in her eyes. Clara might have thought she had put my doubts to rest, but in reality, she had only fueled them. I knew I needed more, something solid, something undeniable. I couldn't confront her again until I had proof. The rest of the night passed in a blur of forced smiles and empty conversation. When Clara went to bed, I stayed up late, poring over every detail I had so far. The number. The Andersons' absence. The strange scent on her dress that wasn't her perfume. And one unsettling thought kept circling back, refusing to leave me alone. If I didn't already know the full truth, how much more was there still to uncover? By the time Sunday morning rolled around, the weight of my suspicions was almost unbearable. Clara seemed unfazed, moving through the day with her usual grace. She hummed while folding laundry, laughed with Lily as they painted with watercolors, and even suggested we plan a family camping trip in the spring. On the surface, everything seemed perfect, but that perfection only deepened my sense of unease. I spent most of the day distracted, my thoughts circling the mystery of the unsaved number. The voice on the phone lingered in my mind, calm and detached, yet somehow, familiar. It wasn't until Clara mentioned running to the grocery store in the afternoon that an idea struck me. "I'll come with you," I offered, pulling on my coat. Clara raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Don't you have papers to grade?" "I need a break," I replied casually. "Besides, I think we're out of coffee." She hesitated for a split second before nodding. "All right. Let's go." As we drove, I watched her out of the corner of my eye. She seemed relaxed, her fingers tapping lightly on the steering wheel as a soft jazz playlist played through the speakers. But I couldn't shake the feeling that she was on edge, her cheerful demeanor masking something deeper. At the grocery store, Clara moved efficiently through the aisles, her list in hand. I trailed behind her, pretending to browse but keeping my attention firmly on her. As we approached the checkout line, she pulled out her phone, her thumb gliding across the screen before she quickly slipped it back into her coat pocket. Something about the motion caught my attention. It was quick, almost nervous, like she didn't want me to notice. My chest tightened as I fought the urge to confront her right there. Instead, I waited until we were back home, the groceries unpacked, and Clara distracted by a phone call in the other room. While she talked in the kitchen, I took her phone from the counter. My hands shook as I opened her messaging app, scrolling through her texts with Jenna. It was all small talk, nothing incriminating. But then I noticed a new thread, a name I didn't recognize, Mark. My heart raced as I opened the conversation. Most of the messages had been deleted, but a few remained. Thanks for last night. It was perfect. You always know how to make me laugh. Can't wait to see you again. My stomach churned as I stared at the screen. The timestamps were damning, New Year's Eve, right around the time she was supposedly at the Andersons' house. I heard her voice in the kitchen, light and cheerful as she chatted with whoever was on the other end. The stark contrast between her tone and the weight of the discovery in my hands was almost unbearable. I put the phone back where I found it, my mind spinning. Who was Mark? How long had this been going on? And, most importantly, what did I do now? That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Clara slept peacefully beside me. The messages replayed in my mind, their meaning crystal clear but still somehow impossible to accept. I couldn't confront her yet, not without more proof. But as I lay there, a quiet resolve took root in my chest. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about Lily, about the life we had built together. I needed to protect what mattered most, no matter how much it hurt. The next day, I woke up feeling drained, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me like a physical burden. Clara, on the other hand, seemed bright and cheerful, as if nothing was amiss. She kissed me on the cheek before heading off to work, leaving me alone with my thoughts, and the growing knot of suspicion in my chest. I spent the morning teaching my geography classes, but my mind wasn't on maps or coordinates. Every time I glanced at my phone, I thought about those texts from Mark. The way Clara had hidden them, the casual affection in her words, it all pointed to something I couldn't ignore. During lunch, I called a friend who worked in IT at the school, a guy named Mike. We had bonded over trivia nights and shared a mutual love of bad sci-fi movies. If there was anyone who could help me dig deeper, it was him. "Hey, Mike," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "I need a favor." "Sure thing, Dan," he replied, his voice warm. "What's up?" I hesitated, debating how much to reveal. "It's, personal. I think Clara might be hiding something, and I need to find out who she's been texting. Is there a way to? I don't know, recover deleted messages?" Mike was silent for a moment, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "You're asking me to hack into her phone, aren't you?" he said, half joking but clearly hesitant. "Not hack," I corrected quickly. "Just, recover. I found some texts she didn't delete, and they're making me think there's more to the story." He sighed. "This is messy, man. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" "Absolutely," I said, my voice firm. "I need the truth, Mike." After another pause, he relented. "All right. I'll send you a program you can use to recover data from her phone. It's pretty straightforward, but you'll need physical access to her phone for at least a few minutes." "Thanks, Mike. I owe you one." When Clara came home that evening, I played the part of the supportive husband. I asked about her day, helped Lily with her bedtime routine, and even offered to clean up after dinner. All the while, I watched her closely, searching for any signs of guilt or hesitation. Around 10 p.m., Clara went upstairs to shower. I waited until I heard the water running before grabbing her phone from the counter. My hands trembled as I plugged it into my laptop and ran the recovery program Mike had sent me. The minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly, but eventually, the program finished extracting the data. I opened the file, scrolling through the recovered texts with bated breath. Most of them were innocuous, chats with friends, reminders for work, but then I found what I was looking for. The texts with Mark were far more explicit than I had imagined. Last night was amazing. I can still feel your touch. Can't stop thinking about you. When can we meet again? New Year's Eve was perfect. Let's make it our tradition. The dates and times aligned perfectly with the night she had claimed to be at the Andersons. My stomach churned as I read on, each message a knife twisting deeper into my chest. This wasn't just a fling, it was something more. By the time Clara came back downstairs, I had returned her phone to its original spot and was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to appear calm. She smiled at me as she poured herself a glass of water, completely unaware of what I now knew. Coming to bed soon? She asked, her tone light. In a bit, I said, forcing a smile. Just finishing up some work. She nodded and disappeared up the stairs, leaving me alone with the damning evidence. I knew I couldn't confront her yet, not without a plan. But one thing was clear, this was no longer just about suspicion. It was about betrayal, and I wasn't going to let it destroy my family without a fight. The next morning, the texts from Mark still weighed heavily on my mind. Each word felt like a splinter under my skin, and no matter how much I tried to focus on my work, I couldn't shake the images they conjured. Clara left early again, her usual sunny demeanor intact, as if nothing in our lives had changed. By midday, I realized I couldn't carry this alone anymore. I needed to talk to someone I trusted. So during my lunch break, I called Sarah, my closest friend from college. She and her husband, Matt, had been like family to Clara and me for years. If anyone could give me perspective, it was her. Dan, hey. Sarah's voice was warm and familiar. What's up? It's been a while. Yeah, sorry about that, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Listen, I need your advice on something. It's kind of serious. Her tone immediately shifted. Of course. What's going on? I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. Saying them out loud would make everything feel more real. I think Clara's having an affair, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dan, Sarah said carefully, why do you think that? I told her everything. Clara's odd behavior on New Year's Eve, the unsaved number, the texts I had found. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking, and my lunch sat untouched in front of me. Dan, Sarah said softly, I'm so sorry. That's a lot to deal with. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice breaking. I can't just confront her without a plan, but keeping this to myself is killing me. You're right not to jump into a confrontation, Sarah said. If you're going to bring it up, you need to have your facts straight, and you need to be ready for whatever happens next. Her words made sense, but they didn't make me feel any better. What if I'm wrong? I asked. What if I'm making all of this up in my head? You're not wrong, Sarah said firmly. Your gut is telling you something, and from what you've told me, there's too much smoke for there not to be fire. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. So what do I do? Sarah's voice softened. You take your time. Gather your evidence. And most importantly, think about what you want, what you're willing to forgive, and what you're not. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Forgiveness hadn't even crossed my mind. I wasn't sure if it was because I didn't think I could forgive Clara or because I didn't think she deserved it. Thanks, Sarah, I said after a long pause. I needed to hear that. Anytime, she replied. And Dan. Whatever happens, you're not alone. Matt and I are here for you, no matter what. The conversation left me feeling both comforted and more unsettled. Sarah was right, I needed to figure out what I wanted. But first, I needed more clarity about what I was up against. That evening, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down at my computer and started looking into Mark. It didn't take long to find him, his number was linked to a local car dealership. His profile picture on social media showed a tall, confident man with an easy smile, the kind of guy who probably turned heads everywhere he went. As I stared at his photo, a surge of anger bubbled up inside me. This was the man Clara had been sneaking around with. This was the man she had chosen over me, over our family. But even as the anger threatened to consume me, another thought crept in, quieter but no less powerful: why? What had I done, or failed to do, that made her turn to someone else? The question haunted me as I closed my laptop and climbed into bed beside her. Clara was already asleep, her breathing slow and steady. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I didn't have all the answers yet. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this go unanswered. Not anymore. The following day was uneventful, at least on the surface. Clara seemed her usual self, chatting about a faculty meeting and asking if I'd seen Lily's missing rain boots. I played along, keeping my suspicions buried beneath a mask of normalcy. But inside, I was growing more restless by the hour. The image of Mark's smug grin on his social media profile was etched into my mind, and I couldn't shake the urge to confront him directly. That afternoon, while Clara was still at work, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, bundled against the January chill. "Sarah?" I said, surprised. "What are you doing here?" She stepped inside, brushing snowflakes from her coat. I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. "Matt's watching the kids, and I thought you might need some backup." I blinked at her, momentarily overwhelmed. "Thanks. I didn't expect you to come all this way." She smiled faintly. "I know you, Dan. You're going to bottle this up until it eats you alive unless someone helps you deal with it." I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. "Clara's not home. We have some time." We sat in the living room, and I filled her in on everything I'd learned since our last conversation, the texts, the number, Mark's identity. As I spoke, Sarah's expression grew more serious. "This Mark guy," she said slowly, "you're sure he's the one?" "Positive," I said, my jaw tightening. The texts matched the timeline. "And the way Clara's been acting, it's him." Sarah tapped her fingers against the armrest of the couch, her gaze distant. "Have you thought about confronting him instead of Clara?" The idea had crossed my mind more than once, but it felt risky. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I admitted. "What if it backfires? What if it just makes things worse?" "It might," she agreed. "But it could also give you the clarity you need. If he confirms it, there's no more guessing. You'll have the truth." Her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. The thought of facing Mark made my stomach churn, but part of me knew she was right. I couldn't keep playing detective forever. Sooner or later, I needed to take action. Before Sarah left, she squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever you decide, Dan, just remember, you're stronger than you think. Don't let this break you." After she was gone, I sat in the silence of the house, replaying her advice over and over. Confronting Mark felt like stepping onto thin ice, but the alternative, continuing to live in doubt, was unbearable. Later that evening, while Clara was upstairs helping Lily pick out a bedtime story, I pulled up Mark's number on my phone. My hands trembled as I hovered over the call button. 100 scenarios flashed through my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. But I knew I couldn't wait much longer. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the button and held the phone to my ear. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Hello?" Mark said, his tone casual. I gripped the phone tighter. "Mark, this is Daniel. Clara's husband." There was a long pause on the other end, the silence stretching until it felt unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was guarded. "What do you want?" My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I think you know exactly what I want." Mark's silence stretched for another agonizing moment, and I could hear him exhale sharply on the other end. "I don't know what you're talking about," he finally said, though his voice was laced with unease. "Don't play dumb," I replied, my tone firmer now. "I've seen the messages. I know what's been going on with you and Clara." Another pause. This time, it was shorter. "Look, I think you've got the wrong idea." "Do I?" I said, my voice rising slightly. "Because from where I'm standing, it's pretty clear. You've been meeting with my wife. On New Year's Eve. Late at night. So let's skip the denials and get to the truth." Mark sighed, and I could almost picture him running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said finally. "Yes, I've been seeing Clara. But it's not what you think." My grip on the phone tightened. "Not what I think?" "You sent her texts saying you couldn't wait to see her again, that New Year's Eve was perfect. How else am I supposed to take that?" "It's complicated," Mark said, his voice low. "We've been talking for a while, but it's not serious. She's struggling with some things. I was just trying to help." My blood boiled at his attempt to downplay their relationship. "You were trying to help?" I said bitterly. "By sneaking around with her behind my back. Do you even realize what you've done to my family?" Mark didn't respond immediately, and when he finally spoke, his tone was defensive. "It's not like that. I didn't force her into anything. Whatever's happening between you two, that's not on me." I laughed coldly. "Oh, so this is my fault now? Because you couldn't keep your distance?" "Look," he snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin, "I didn't call to argue with you, okay? If you've got a problem, take it up with her." I clenched my jaw, my heart pounding in my chest. "Trust me, I will. But first, I want you to stay the hell away from my wife. Do you understand me?" Mark's tone shifted, growing colder. "You can't tell me what to do. If Clara wants to see me, that's her decision." That was it, the final straw. "This is over," I said through gritted teeth. "I don't care what you think you've got with her. If you don't walk away now, you're going to regret it." Before he could respond, I hung up, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the counter. My chest heaved with anger and frustration, but underneath it all was a gnawing sense of dread. Mark's words had confirmed what I already suspected, but they had also added a new layer of complexity. This wasn't just about Clara sneaking around, it was about the cracks in our marriage, cracks that someone like Mark had been all too eager to exploit. As much as I wanted to place all the blame on him, I couldn't ignore the deeper questions gnawing at me. What had pushed Clara to this point? And, more importantly, could anything be done to fix it? I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was certain, the time for silence was over. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling as Clara slept soundly beside me. The conversation with Mark replayed in my mind, his defensive tone, the way he tried to minimize what had happened. The truth was out now, undeniable, and I couldn't live in this limbo any longer. It was time to confront Clara. The next morning, after Lily had been dropped off at preschool and we were alone in the house, I decided to act. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, scrolling through her phone, when I walked in. She glanced up at me with a smile, but it faltered when she saw the expression on my face. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. "No," I said bluntly, pulling out a chair and sitting across from her. "We need to talk." Her brow furrowed. About what? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. About you and Mark. The color drained from her face. Her hand froze mid-motion, and for a moment, she looked like she might deny it. But then she set her coffee cup down, her shoulders slumping. I was going to tell you, she said softly. My chest tightened. When? After how long? How many more late nights and lies were you planning to tell before you thought I deserved to know? Clara looked away, guilt etched into her features. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We were just talking at first. I didn't mean for it to. To what? I interrupted, my voice sharp. To turn into secret texts and sneaking around on New Year's Eve. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? To us? Tears welled in her eyes, and she reached out as if to take my hand, but I pulled away. I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling. I never wanted to hurt you, Daniel. Then why? I demanded. Why him? Why now? She hesitated, wiping at her eyes. I don't know, she admitted. I felt lost. Disconnected. We'd been drifting apart for months, and I didn't know how to fix it. Mark, he listened. He made me feel. Don't, I said, my voice breaking. Don't sit here and tell me he made you feel special. That's supposed to be my job, Clara. You're supposed to talk to me. Her tears fell freely now, and she buried her face in her hands. I know, she sobbed. I know I've messed everything up. I've been so selfish, so stupid. I stood, pacing the kitchen as my emotions roiled inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel the same pain she'd caused me. But another part of me, smaller, quieter, just felt hollow. You've broken something I don't know how to fix, I said finally, my voice heavy. How am I supposed to trust you after this? How are we supposed to move forward? Clara looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I don't know, she said honestly. But I want to try. Please, Daniel. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Her words hung in the air, a fragile plea that felt both sincere and impossible. I stared at her, torn between the love we had shared for years and the deep betrayal that had shattered it. I need time, I said finally. I need space to figure out what I want. Clara nodded, her expression crumpling as she wiped her tears. Take as much time as you need, she said. But please, don't give up on us. As I left the kitchen, her words echoed in my mind. I didn't know if I could forgive her, or if I even wanted to. All I knew was that the road ahead was going to be long and uncertain, and I wasn't sure if either of us would survive the journey. The days that followed were a blur of cold silence and tense interactions. Clara made every effort to bridge the widening gap between us, but I kept my distance, unable to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the one who had betrayed me. Each time I looked at her, Mark's texts replayed in my mind, his smug voice from our phone call twisting the knife deeper. For Lily's sake, we kept up the appearance of normalcy. We took her to the park, helped her with her puzzles, and sat through her favorite cartoons, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Even Lily, in her innocent way, seemed to notice something was wrong. Why are you sad, Daddy? She asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. Her question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'm not sad, sweetheart, I lied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Just tired. She studied me with those wide, trusting eyes that made my heart ache. Maybe you and Mommy should play a game together. That always makes me happy. I smiled faintly, kissing her forehead. That's a great idea, I said, though the thought of spending time alone with Clara felt unbearable. Once Lily was asleep, I retreated to the spare room where I had been sleeping since the confrontation. Clara had suggested it, giving me space while she stayed in our bedroom. The arrangement was practical but symbolic. The gulf between us was growing, and neither of us seemed to know how to bridge it. That night, I lay awake, my thoughts spiraling. I had spent the past few days alternating between anger and sadness, but now a new emotion began to take hold, fear. Fear of what this meant for our future, for Lily's stability, for the life we had built together. I needed answers. Not just about Clara and Mark, but about myself. Was I willing to fight for this marriage? Could I ever forgive her? Or was it already too late? The next morning, Clara approached me as I was pouring coffee. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes betraying her lack of sleep. "Daniel," she said quietly, "can we talk?" I nodded, though my stomach churned at the thought of yet another painful conversation. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I had confronted her days earlier. "I've been thinking a lot about what I did," she began, her voice shaky. "About how I've hurt you, and how much I've jeopardized everything we've built together." I said nothing, letting her continue. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I want to earn it. I've already blocked Mark's number. I'm willing to go to counseling, to do whatever it takes to rebuild your trust." Her words were sincere, but they felt like they were coming from a distance, muffled by the wall I had built around myself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was genuinely remorseful, that she was willing to do the work to repair the damage. But the scars were still too fresh. "I hear you, Clara," I said finally. "But it's not just about what you're willing to do. It's about whether I can ever look at you the same way again." Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I continued, my voice cracking. "I don't know if I even want to try." Clara broke down, sobbing into her hands. I stood and walked away, unable to bear the sight of her pain, or the reflection of my own. In the days that followed, Clara made every effort to show her commitment to repairing our marriage. She left me notes apologizing, avoided bringing up Mark, and tried to engage me in family activities. But each gesture, no matter how sincere, felt hollow. My anger and hurt were too deep, and every time I saw her, the betrayal loomed like a shadow between us. I couldn't shake the feeling that her actions were more about easing her guilt than addressing the pain she had caused me. It wasn't enough. I needed more than empty apologies, I needed proof that she understood the magnitude of what she had done. One evening, while Lily was asleep, Clara approached me as I sat in the living room. She was holding a small stack of papers, her hands trembling slightly. "I've been journaling," she said softly. "Writing everything down. It's helped me process what I've done and what I need to change." I looked at the papers in her hand, hesitant to take them. "And you want me to read this?" She nodded, her eyes glassy. "Only if you're ready. I just want you to know how much I regret everything, Daniel. How much I want to make things right." Reluctantly, I took the pages and set them on the coffee table. "I'll read them later," I said, my voice flat. She lingered for a moment before retreating upstairs. Once she was gone, I stared at the stack of papers, my mind warring with itself. Part of me wanted to throw them away, to refuse to let her control the narrative of her betrayal. But another part of me, the part that still clung to the hope of salvaging our marriage, was curious. After a long moment, I picked up the pages and began to read. Her words were raw and unfiltered, an outpouring of guilt and reflection. She wrote about how disconnected she had felt over the past year, how Mark had been a distraction from the loneliness she didn't know how to face. She admitted to feeling ashamed, to knowing she had made a terrible mistake even as she continued down the path that led to betrayal. But one line stood out above the rest: "I don't want to lose him. I don't want to lose what we've built together." I set the papers down, my chest tightening. For the first time, I saw a glimpse of the Clara I had fallen in love with, the woman who valued our family and our life together. But was that enough? The next morning, I decided to reach out to someone who might offer clarity: Sarah. She had been my anchor through this storm, and I needed her perspective now more than ever. When I called, she picked up immediately. "Dan, hey. How are you holding up?" "I don't know," I admitted. Clara gave me something to read, her thoughts about what happened. It felt honest. But I still don't know if I can trust her. Sarah paused, her voice thoughtful when she finally spoke. "It's okay not to have all the answers right now. But let me ask you this, do you think she's being genuine? Do you believe she really wants to change?" I thought about it, replaying Clara's tearful apologies and the words she had written. "I think she does," I said slowly. "But I don't know if that's enough. What if I can't forgive her? What if I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop?" "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," Sarah said gently. "It's about deciding whether the love you have is worth the effort it'll take to heal. No one can make that choice for you, Dan. But whatever you decide, you don't have to do it alone." Her words lingered with me long after the call ended. As much as I wanted to believe that Clara's remorse was genuine, the question remained, was I willing to take the risk of rebuilding, knowing that the cracks might never fully heal? That night, as I lay in the spare room, staring at the ceiling, I realized that the answer wasn't going to come overnight. But for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to imagine the possibility of a future, whether it was with Clara or without her. Another week passed, filled with strained conversations and a quiet dance of avoidance. Clara kept her distance unless I initiated a conversation, which wasn't often. Lily, blissfully unaware, became the glue that held the day-to-day together. Her laughter was a reminder of what was at stake, and of what I didn't want to lose. One evening, I sat in the living room, staring at an old photo of Clara and me on our honeymoon. We were standing on a beach, the sun setting behind us, her head resting on my shoulder as I held her close. It felt like a lifetime ago, a memory from another life. The question that had haunted me for weeks resurfaced: could we ever get back to that? Clara must have sensed something because she walked in quietly, hesitating in the doorway. "Can I sit with you?" she asked softly. I nodded, and she settled onto the couch, leaving a careful distance between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling, "I know I can't undo what I've done. And I know I've hurt you in ways I can't even begin to understand. But I need you to know that I love you. I always have." Her words struck something deep inside me, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. "If you loved me, why did you do it?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Why wasn't I enough?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head. "It wasn't about you. It was about me, about my own insecurities, my own fears. I let those things cloud my judgment, and I made choices I'll regret for the rest of my life." I looked away, the anger and pain bubbling just beneath the surface. "Do you have any idea how hard this has been for me? To question everything we've built, to wonder if anything we had was even real." Her tears spilled over, and she reached for my hand, but I didn't move. "It was real, Daniel," she said urgently. "What we had, what we have, it's real. I know I've broken your trust, and I know it might take years to rebuild it, if it can even be rebuilt. But I'm willing to try. I'll do whatever it takes." Her words hung in the air, fragile and raw. I wanted to believe her, to trust that her remorse was genuine. But the scars of her betrayal were still fresh, and the thought of opening myself up to more pain terrified me. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice breaking. "And even if I can, I don't know if things will ever be the same." She nodded, wiping her tears. "I understand. But I'm not giving up on us. Not yet." We sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the faint hum of the heater kicking on. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope, not for a quick fix, but for the possibility of healing, however long it might take. The following morning, the weight of the previous night's conversation lingered. Clara had left for work early, and the house was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee, and stared out the window at the frost-covered lawn. My mind churned with the same relentless question, where do we go from here? I didn't have the answers, but I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. It was time to take action, no matter how difficult it might be. I called Sarah. "Dan," she said, her voice warm with familiarity. "How are you holding up?" "I think I've made a decision," I said, the words feeling heavy on my tongue. "I'm going to try counseling, with Clara." There was a pause, then a quiet, "That's big, Dan." "Are you sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I can't keep living like this. If there's even a chance we can fix things, I owe it to Lily to try." "You owe it to yourself too," Sarah said gently. "Healing isn't just about staying together, it's about finding peace, whether that's with her or without her." "I'm proud of you." Her support gave me a sense of reassurance I hadn't felt in weeks. After we hung up, I searched for local therapists specializing in marriage counseling and booked an appointment for the following week. When Clara returned home that evening, I told her. She looked stunned, her eyes widening as she processed my words. "You mean it? You'll go to counseling with me?" I nodded, though my stomach churned with uncertainty. "We can't do this alone, Clara. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward, we need help." Her expression softened, and she stepped closer, hesitating before speaking. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know this isn't easy for you, and I'm so grateful you're willing to try." Her gratitude felt genuine, but I couldn't let myself fully relax. This was just the beginning, and the road ahead would be anything but smooth. Still, her reaction gave me a glimmer of hope, however faint. In the days leading up to the counseling session, things between us were tentative but slightly more open. Clara seemed to be walking on eggshells, careful not to push me too far, while I tried to remain civil, though my emotions often threatened to overwhelm me. For Lily's sake, we maintained a facade of normalcy, but behind closed doors, the cracks in our relationship were glaring. The night before the session, Clara knocked on the door of the spare room where I had been sleeping. I hesitated before opening it, finding her standing there with a hesitant expression. "I just wanted to say. I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of what?" I asked, my tone cautious. "Of what you'll say tomorrow. Of what the counselor might think of me. But mostly, of losing you." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I had spent so much time focusing on my own pain that I hadn't fully considered hers. As much as I hated what she had done, I could see the toll it had taken on her too. "I guess we're both scared," I said honestly. "But if we don't face it, we'll never get anywhere." She nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Thank you for giving us a chance, Daniel. I don't deserve it, but I'm going to fight for it." As she left, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and bracing myself for what the next day would bring. The thought of airing our deepest wounds in front of a stranger was terrifying, but it also felt necessary. If there was any hope for us, it would start there, in the uncomfortable, painful truths we had to confront. The day of the counseling session arrived, and the atmosphere between Clara and me was heavy with anticipation. We drove to the therapist's office in silence, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Clara fidgeted with her hands in her lap, while I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles white. When we arrived, the therapist, a calm, middle-aged woman named Dr. Harper, greeted us warmly and led us into her cozy office. The space was inviting, with soft lighting and shelves lined with books and plants. Despite the calming environment, my chest felt tight as I sat down on the couch beside Clara. Dr. Harper began by explaining the process, her voice steady and reassuring. "This is a safe space for both of you to share your feelings openly. My role is to help you navigate those emotions and find clarity, whether that means rebuilding your relationship or finding closure." I glanced at Clara, whose hands were clenched tightly in her lap. Her vulnerability was palpable, but it didn't lessen the weight of my own hurt. "Why don't we start with why you're here?" Dr. Harper suggested, looking at me. I hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I found out Clara was having an affair," I said, the words feeling heavy as they left my mouth. It shattered everything I thought I knew about our marriage. Clara flinched but didn't interrupt. Dr. Harper nodded, her expression neutral but attentive. "And how has that affected you?" "It's destroyed my trust," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. "I question everything now, her love for me, the life we've built together. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust her again." Dr. Harper turned to Clara. "Clara, how do you feel hearing that?" Tears welled in her eyes, and she wiped them away quickly. "I feel awful. I hate that I've caused him so much pain. I know what I did was wrong, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I do love him, and I want to fix this." Her words hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Dr. Harper gave us both a moment before speaking again. "It's clear there's a lot of pain on both sides. Rebuilding trust is one of the hardest things a couple can do, but it's not impossible. It starts with honesty, about what happened, why it happened, and what you both need moving forward." The session continued, and for the first time, Clara opened up about the feelings that had led her to the affair. She spoke about her loneliness, her insecurities, and how she had let those emotions push her into making terrible decisions. Hearing her admit these things was both painful and cathartic. It didn't justify her actions, but it helped me understand them. When it was my turn, I didn't hold back. I laid bare the anger, betrayal, and self-doubt her actions had caused. Clara listened without interrupting, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, I felt like she truly grasped the depth of the damage. By the end of the session, we weren't magically healed, but a small shift had occurred. Dr. Harper encouraged us to continue the work, both individually and together, and to be patient with ourselves and each other. On the drive home, the silence between us felt different, not as heavy, but tentative, like the first rays of light breaking through after a storm. Clara reached over and placed her hand on mine, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't pull away. "I know it's a long road," she said softly. "But I'll do whatever it takes." I nodded, my grip on the steering wheel loosening. "We'll see," I said, my voice steady but guarded. "One step at a time." As we pulled into the driveway, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. It was fragile and uncertain, but it was there. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other.